Just like that, the much discussed but never official Nova Disney Plus series has gone from rumored to confirmed, with Deadline reporting the onboarding of a showrunner. Criminal Minds Ed Bernero, who also co-created the Criminal Minds spinoff Suspect Behavior, will serve as writer and showrunner for the Richard Ryder-focused series. Additionally, off the heels of last week's reports about Chris Evans returning to the MCU in Avengers Doomsday, last Friday, Variety broke the news that Evans' frequent scene partner, Hayley Atwell, is also expected to reprise her role as Agent Peggy Carter. Marvel has yet to provide a comment at this time, and there are virtually no other details or specifics to go off. But much like Peggy, we're not ones to let that keep us off the field. Speaking of fields, do either of these announcements come out of left field for anybody here?
I don't think the Nova show is too much of a shock. I think that Marvel would make sense to go all in on that character for a show. It's going to be a popular character, but this writer showrunner, I wonder if maybe they're going to take it like kind of how Lanterns is going to be, this like cop TV detective series, if it's going to be something like that. I won't lie and say I've watched Criminal Minds, because after a while, when you grew up as a millennial and you watched all those CSI type shows, it was like white noise after a while. I fell off hard on those shows, so I don't remember much about Criminal Minds. I think it has have Gruber in it? Is that his name? Gruber? Michael whatever. It doesn't matter. Cut that out.
I can't
Anyway.
get MacGruber out of my head when you say that.
That's what I
It's like I'm not going to
That guy's
compute
name, you know
anything
what
else.
Throats.
Well, clearly I'm not alone in not watching that show. So anyway, I think that's exciting. And I think that we'll talk about it later when we talk about the Spotify poll, but these newer characters are the ones people want to see and want to invest in. So I think that that's great. Hayley Atwell, like just adding to the list, I guess. Peggy could come back as Agent Carter or Captain Carter. We don't know. It could be both. It could be either. I think it just depends on what they do with maybe Chris Evans' character, because I'm sure you guys talked about it at length last week. I've been chronically offline, so I haven't really listened, but yeah, I mean, if they make him just Captain America again, they just have Peggy, I think that's not very exciting or interesting. So maybe if he's like Nomad and she gets to be something else, then that could be fun. But there's just not a lot to talk about with those kinds of announcements, in my opinion.
I think this is probably the first of many of these types of news stories where we're going to start getting all of these people confirmed that are going to come to Doomsday and be in that movie. Whenever that movie was first talked about, there were numbers being thrown around in the trades like 70 and 80 in reference to how many characters they were going to try to juggle in this film. And we haven't heard anything about that since the Russos came on board. Who knows what's changed? Who knows what types of liberties they've taken with any type of script that existed at that time. But still, it kind of brings into focus that this is going to be a very busy movie, and I think it was probably always intended to be a busy movie, but then now that you've got the Russos in there, they're used to doing that. We saw Infinity War, we saw Endgame. They had these multitude of characters they had to balance. So I would imagine that the floodgates will open. I mean, this movie is supposed to come out in May of 2026. It's going to have to start hitting the ground running pretty soon if it's going to make that date. And so you've got a lot of work to do. So I would imagine we're going to start to see a lot of this. As far as like the Chris Evans and the Hayley Atwell and the Robert Downey Jr. and all of that type of stuff, I don't know. I think if we're going to go all in on the old guard, let's go all in on the old guard. I mean, let's not kind of tiptoe around it. I'm not crazy about the idea of all of these people playing new characters. I guess like, oh, Chris Evans is back, but he's this guy instead. Oh, wait, he looks like Steve. Wait, you're not Steve. And it's just like, I just don't really need that. I mean, we're going to have that with Robert Downey Jr. anyway, maybe. We don't really know, but it's like, I don't know. We spent so much time establishing these actors in these roles. They're the heart and the soul of the franchise. It's like, if you're going to bring him back, you just do the thing, you know, no half measures, like just bring him back to do the thing. Don't bring him back as some rando or whatever, just to have Chris Evans in the movie. So I don't know. You know, it's Deadline's reporting it's Peggy Carter, but like you said, Hayley, it could be Captain Carter. We saw that was a linchpin character in What If, so who knows ultimately, but just get ready. I mean, what are we at? So we're at about 3 of 70, so just get ready for the announcements to start pouring in. You know?
Yeah, it's true. The one thing we've talked about, we talked about the Cap story a lot last week, or the Chris Evans story, and I do think it will be Cap. But the one thing this made me think of as an option with Peggy coming back is, what if whenever Doom comes into our universe to encounter Chris Evans or Captain America, what if one of the ways he inserts himself is he comes into the universe during the time that Cap went back and lived his life with Peggy? Like, what if we see that is something that went on during that timeline, which is something I've really wanted to see, that, like, what was Cap doing that whole time, you know? And so if he comes over to disrupt our timeline in some way, or even insinuate himself into our timeline, what if he does it, you know, creates Latveria 50 years before to the, you know, rise or something like that? I could see that being a lot of fun. And just getting a little bit of that story. And the Nova series, I do feel like this is another classic, like, DC Marvel rivalry thing where, like, DC is making their Space Cop show and Marvel's like, oh yeah? You want to do a Space Cop show? We could do a Space Cop show. You want to do your biggest two heroes fighting? We'll do that too. Yeah, it feels very much like a deliberate thing. But I've been wanting that series for a long time, so I'm down.
There were so many what ifs there. I had to kind of check myself and make sure I knew what we were talking about here. It's not What If Season 3. We are talking about Avengers Doomsday and the Nova series here. So, Hayley, to your point, last week we did speak at length about the many possibilities that are on the table with the return of Chris Evans. But looking at the addition of Hayley Atwell here, and again, like you said, Jay, it's Deadline that's saying it's Agent Carter, but you know, consider Occam's razor, and, you know, the simplest or most obvious solution is often the solution. So I think it does make sense for her to be Agent Carter. And then, you know, extrapolating from that, I think it makes sense that while I would be open to seeing a variation of Steve Rogers, I do think this is going to be the sacred timeline version of Steve that we've seen, because you look at the way that Endgame ended. It really did focus on those three characters that we have returning now. It was Tony Stark making his sacrifice. You hear the audio cue to him working at the forge at the very end of those credits again. But beyond that, it's all Cap and Peggy. It's Steve and Peggy in that moment finally getting that dance. So with the Russos coming back, with is it Marcus or McFeely coming back? I think it's McFeely coming back.
Yeah,
so,
I think so.
It just makes sense that they'd want to continue that through line, even though Endgame was such a perfect ending. That's just, it seems like that's the direction it's going for me. Talking about Nova, I have not seen Criminal Minds. I've often cited my brothers of having watched, you know, series that I wasn't super familiar with, but absorbed kind of vicariously. This is one of the instances where it was my sister. I remember her binging Criminal Minds, like watching marathons, like basically claiming the couch for like an entire Saturday. And it's like, your sister is watching Criminal Minds. That's what's happening. Don't argue with it. It's just going to happen. So from the little bit that I did see, I always enjoyed it. But I was thinking about actors and characters I could remember from that show. And the only one I can place is, I think it was the kid from Freaks and Geeks. And I think he came back and was like an analyst that ended up having a villain route. But whatever. We're not here to talk about Criminal Minds. But the comparisons to Lanterns actually had not occurred to me. And I think that's really good insight there. And it does make me wonder, what are they going to do to make Richard Ryder a little bit different? Because we saw it with Captain Marvel. They were a little bit worried about the comparisons with the Green Lantern, so they made some changes to that character. And then Miss Marvel, they did the same thing. It was like, yeah, they changed her power set, but they're like, okay, we want her to be, you know, manipulating light, but how can we make that different from Green Lantern? So I think they have the same problem on their hands with Nova, but I will be very curious to see how they choose to tackle it.
Yeah, we've seen that the art of the side character is a little tricky too, like introducing a side character that not everybody knows and maybe they sort of recognize, and do we put them on the big screen? Do we put them on the small screen? It just seems to go off better to build these characters through a series. It does not seem to necessarily land when you just throw these like characters that maybe people don't have a lot of familiarity with into the movie theater and just expect people will go see it because it's Marvel. It just doesn't really seem like we're in that point anymore. So I do like it as a series. I think you can kind of do a lot more with it. You could eventually, if you feel like the show's popular and it's gaining steam, you could sort of do what you did with Miss Marvel, pull her into a film and make her a character that's sharing the screen with other established characters or whatever. You could easily do that with Nova if that's something that you wanted to do down the line. But I think it makes a lot of sense as a good like testing ground, introduction, introduction type thing to bring the character in. I still have hope that they'll bring in, like, they'll tell us that story of the fall of his home planet. Like, I really want to see, like, episode 1. Like, I want to see Thanos back. I want to see, like, that story told. I think that would be a really, like, interesting way to hook people to these types of shows, which you have to convince people to hit play for the first time. It's not a given, especially with how many characters are out there. And so the idea of, like, yeah, Thanos is in this. We're going back to Avengers. We're bringing back Downey and Chris Evans and all, like, that type of stuff. I don't know. I feel like you're going to have a big draw if you could somehow link it to that past type of stuff, that Nova core that we've already established in the thing.
Suppose there was some reporting a while back that they shot and had to edit. It's something that hit the editing room floor. Some of that scene of Xandar being attacked by Thanos.
Yeah,
and
we talked about it.
Yeah, we talked about it on this show. Yeah. Okay, and I'm really curious if they saved some of those assets and they're like, we have a really killer fight scene that we could, like, is half done. Like, we could just finish it and insert it into this other movie or this TV series as a start. And yeah, that would be a great way to bring folks over to Disney Plus. Because the thing about the Disney Plus series and having a character start there and then move to the big screen, it's a double-edged sword, because yes, it's a nice way to introduce people to them, but then you have the people who will go, well, I didn't watch the show and I don't want to go see the movie if I missed the show, and, like, feel like they're behind, and it adds to the whole narrative of, oh, well, they're just doing too much and I can't keep up with this Marvel stuff anymore. So yeah, it's kind of tough. I'm hoping we can get back to the days, and when we were there, we were always kind of complaining there wasn't enough connection, but I'm kind of hoping they lean back towards the days of, like, Daredevil, where it's like, make great shows, they're tenuously connected, have crossovers when you can that, like, service the fans and make us excited, but, like, don't make your movies reliant on the TV shows as much. Make your shows great and make them connected, but don't make the movies reliant. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to migrate back to theory territory there, because you cited that 45 minutes of unused footage from Infinity War, and that's kind of been my hope as well. If they can find some way to insert some of that, that'd be great. But my mind kind of went somewhere else thinking about that, a little behind the scenes here, as I was looking for images of Nova for, the show thumbnails and graphics and whatnot. I was hard pressed to find Richard Ryder. Most of it was Sam Alexander. So I was thinking how cool it would be if they did go that route, have Nova take place all before Infinity War, have the climax be that battle on Xandar. We actually lose the Richard Ryder version of Nova to set up Sam Alexander to be a part of the Young Adventures. Could be cool. Could be separated but connected.
Then we'd be even more like Green Lantern,
Yeah, exactly.
The past.
Let's keep leaning.
If you do it better, nobody will make any of those comparisons.
Oh, well, they may, and it's kind of the goal, right? You do it better, and then they make all those comparisons.
Right.
Yeah, they make all those comparisons. Like, well, yeah, you did it. You beat them. That's what they've always done up until now, I feel like.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the thing. Maybe they just keep that distinguished competition thing going. It's worked for them so far for like 90 years.